Aren't there times when you want to talk about everything? Sometimes talking about anything is very therapeutic. And don't forget about talking about, well, nothing. Sometimes it's about just listening to what others have to say. Please join me for my podcast, Yada Yada Yada, a chat about everything, anything, and nothing. It's a great way of knowing about what's not coming next. Well, hello and welcome. I'm your host, Julie Schrager, with the podcast Yada Yada Yada, a chat about everything, anything, and nothing. And I did a 3-minute Thursday interview for you all that you are sure to enjoy. And yet again, I have gone over the 3-minute mark. However, let me explain the reason. This gentleman that I did the interview with, his name is Baktash Ahadi, with the podcast Stories of Transformation. And when we were doing the interview, he caught on to the fact that it was a little glitchy. And we continued on with the interview. And I had decided to contact him and make him aware that, it was kind of spotty. I did try to get as much noise out as I could, but it was still there, and asked him if he would mind to do the interview on his own recording platform and then email me his interview answers. And he was more than generous to do that. I was going to chop up this interview and make it 3 minutes rather than 7 minutes, but I felt that it would do a disservice to Baktash because it flowed so well. So I decided to keep the full 7 minutes. So I have gone over the 3 minutes yet again. I think I need to change the name of this podcast. So 13-minute Thursday, maybe. And also, I was going to replace his voice asking the questions to me asking the questions. But again, I just didn't like how it flowed. So I am going to have you listen to his interview with him asking the questions and answering them. And I know that you are going to find this gentleman as interesting as I have found him. Please go to his podcast, Stories of Transformation. It can be heard all over Spotify and Google, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. And he's also on Instagram with the podcast Stories of Transformation, stories_of_transformation. Hit him up. He's really pretty awesome, and I think that you will be very interested in hearing about his life. So without further ado, here is Mr. Baktash Ahadi from Stories of Transformation. Enjoy.
Thanks for having me on your podcast, Julie. I appreciate it. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your podcast is about? Sure. I was born in Afghanistan during the Afghan-Soviet War, and my parents decided to flee because my father's life was in danger, so we fled. I was a toddler at the time, so I have no recollection of it. But we eventually made it to Pakistan from Afghanistan, spent 2 years in refugee camps, and eventually my father was able to secure, and eventually my family was sponsored by a Lutheran organization to come to Pennsylvania. And I was raised in a small little town in Pennsylvania called Carlisle. And it was a great upbringing because Carlisle was always deemed as one of the top 25 most livable towns in America. I pretty much tried to assimilate as soon as possible to American culture and American life. And all that changed 9 days after I started college, because that's when the attacks of 9/11 happened on the United States. And what that did is that it brought Afghanistan back on the map for the United States, and it brought Afghanistan back on the map for me and my family. And so the question that I ended up pursuing subsequently as a result was, why do people do what they do? And that question led me to serve as a Peace Corps volunteer in Mozambique, where I was an English teacher. And people ask me how that experience was, and I often tell them it was the best education of my life because I didn't have any running water, I didn't have electricity for parts of the day, and I got malaria 2 times. And to this day, when I turn on my tap water in the morning, I always think to myself, thank God I don't have to fetch water today. So after coming back from that experience, I did some consulting for the government, and then President Obama in December of 2009 announced the surge in Afghanistan. And 1 month later, I was on a plane to Afghanistan where I served as a cultural advisor, interpreter for various elements of the government, to include the Marines. And that was a life-changing experience. And upon coming back, and subsequently upon coming back, I've fallen in love with storytelling and the power of stories. And that leads me to starting my podcast, which is called Stories of Transformation, which is really about remarkable people who have gone through adversity, who have learned something along the way, and now are in a place in their lives where they can share it with the world. Are there any particular topics you like to discuss, or is there a favorite topic you like to discuss? The topic that I think I like to discuss most, because it's something that I think about through my lived experience, is this idea of trying to find a sense of home and belonging. As an immigrant to the United States, it's an interesting place to kind of come into. There are moments in my life where I definitely found a sense of home and belonging, and there are moments in my life where that hasn't been the case, especially given the fact that I come from Afghanistan, the place where Al-Qaeda launched their attacks in the United States. So in many ways, I think of my life as pre-9/11 and a post-9/11 understanding of who I am. And I've gone through what it means to find a sense of home and belonging. And for me, I kind of think of it as not being a sense of place. Home for me isn't a sense of place necessarily, but it's a sense of who I'm with. In particular, my parents. When I'm with my parents, I feel like I'm at home because they're quite literally the only constant in my life. So I think about, I like to talk to people that kind of really think deeply about that topic of what does it mean to find a sense of belonging? What does that look like? What does it feel like for people to actually see you in your authentic self? And how do you get there? So that's the topic that I really like to think about and talk about with my guests. How do you find those people who have gone through transformations? Yeah, in the advent of modern day technology, it's wonderful to have the internet because now there is really no resistance between me and anybody in the world. And so I will scour the internet to find individuals that I find to be remarkable, who are willing to share their stories. It's as simple as doing a Google search or going to websites like TED.com and doing a search related to, trauma, PTSD, topics that I like to kind of research and think about because there are topics that I've kind of lived. More topics like loss, grief, suicide, unconditional love. I really like to talk about and look up and think about topics related to the human condition. So people that are interested in those types of things are relatively easy to find as long as you know how to use Google. Is there one person's transformation that has affected you? Well, I'm not sure if I can answer that question specifically. I really enjoy. So maybe it's important. Maybe it's helpful to kind of share that. I'm really interested in not necessarily the person's lived experience that I'm speaking to, but more interestingly, I want to know how they give meaning to their lived experience. So for me, whenever I talk to somebody who really thinks deeply about the meaning that they give to the thing that they experienced, is really what I want to kind of reveal and unpack with that individual. So it's really the kind of approach I take. And so anybody that's willing to do that, I'm really interested in speaking to. And thus far, most of my guests have been that way. So that's why I like to share their stories. Can you tell your listeners what platforms your podcast is on? Sure. Stories of Transformation is on Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcast, essentially anywhere where you can find your podcasts. So if you like Stories of Transformation, please share it far and wide, and we hope it inspires you to become better. Okay, thank you.